Here it is. It's been too long.
I know. We have been in a cinematic vortex for the past couple months.
It's been so long. You and I both now are wearing glasses.
We're both wearing glasses. We're both wearing red. We're both seeing red from the state of the industry.
Seeing red. That's why we have on red today. Because that
That's
is the
right.
state of the industry.
And the industry is still fire.
Emergency.
Four alarm fire in the industry. So we're, we were trying to sort it out with help from our friends at the Miami Film Festival that we were very involved with this year, and our special guest today, Ted Hope, that we spoke to at the festival, which is the bulk of today's interview, which I'm very excited for everyone in the Screen Heat world to listen to as well.
Yeah, we had a great festival. I mean,
Yeah.
certainly the panel on playable cinema and what's happening with the future of cinema. It
Oh,
was
yeah.
dynamic. We had
That was
Dean
great.
Lyon, visual effects legend, in the house.
Mm-hmm.
Brought him
Yeah,
in.
that's right.
Um, but all the Miami Media and Film Market panels were incredible. This one included. So our guest that's coming up is a legend, another legend.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. Absolutely. A legend in the feature film producing world, Ted Hope, who also ran Amazon Movies, helped start that department over there. Got some Oscar nominated films under his belt as an executive as well. Three-time Grand Jury Prize winner at Sundance, worked on, obviously produced American Splendor, along with over 70 feature films under his belt. And now that he's left Amazon, he's back to producing. And his new concept called Nandi, which he gets into in the interview, which is a very fascinating thing. If any of you follow his Substack, Film Stack, Hope for Film, he talks a lot about this new Nandi or non-dependent movement, which is different than the indie film scene of the 90s and 2000s that he was a part of. And it has a lot to do with self-finance, but also owning your IP, self-distribution, creating your own circuit, your own audience, your own community. It's an interesting way of looking at this new wave of independent filmmakers and content creators that have come along the past few years.
Yeah, I wasn't going to talk about this. We are going to talk a little bit about Netflix um, moving forward, but I do want to talk about about YouTube, about YouTube, because there was a success that just happened with a creator by the name of Markiplier.
Yes.
Yeah. So Markiplier had this film, or has this film called Iron Lung, and not just Iron Lung the film, but he has his own movement. He has a big following, and so Iron Lung was self-funded, self-produced, and then it was a hit. Especially in comparison to the budget. So the budget was 3 million. It made over 50 million. I mean, that's a hit. And so it did its theatrical run, and then he wanted to self distribute. And he wanted to do it through the venue that he came up in, which is YouTube. YouTube didn't have in place a way for him to distribute his film on the platform. Because typically YouTube works with third party vendors. And so that's distributors and these things. And he didn't want to work with a distributor. He already made it himself. Why pay a distributor? He has his own
Right.
following.
Yeah, and
He
this
wants
is
to
like
take it
that
straight
that
to the people.
the YouTube VOD model, where similar to Apple and Amazon, you could pay $7 or $5 or whatever and watch the movie on YouTube, the official movie on YouTube.
Right, but they didn't have in place a way for an independent creator
Right. You still
to
had to go through one of those aggregators or
to get an
distributors.
aggregator, right? But why pay them a percentage? I don't have anything against aggregators because oftentimes, especially the good ones, they help. But in this case, if you already have your following on the way to move forward, then you want to be able to do it yourself and take it straight to the people. So he forged forward. He said that there was a lot of legal paperwork and a lot of red tape that he had to break through, but he's distributing for the first time. Someone is distributing a film directly on YouTube of that nature. And so that is this kind of model of power to the people. Before it was what's called gatekeepers. and you worked in that system because you were in an agency.
Yeah.
Um, not that you were a gatekeeper specifically.
Well, I technically was a keeper of the gate. I was like,
Okay, man, I was trying to give you a soft pass, but if you want to,
I keep saying those are my entourage days.
yeah, that's right. And so, there's these gatekeepers in place. There's already a machine. That machine is moving, and it's filled with producers and writers and directors and actors, and that are with agencies and agents and studios and networks. And so that makes up the bulk of typically what you see on TV in theaters. 80 to 90% of it. Then you
Right.
have outliers like your Markipliers and some people for a wall. They put their own films in theaters and sometimes they take off. Um, and then you have another layer that's like the streaming system that you can, kind of get an aggregator and pay a percentage of or pay to play of your particular film or whatever piece of content that then as people watch it it gets monetized, but you still have to pay percentage of it.
Yeah. Correct.
And so it's becoming transformative because now the gatekeepers, and I think in a big part, of course, social media, now AI is changing things too. That system is transforming now. And so it was really an incredible conversation to hear Ted Hope, who comes from old school Hollywood, become an acolyte of what's happening, the new paradigm. And he's a champion of it. He
Yeah.
has a Substack, so I recommend anyone listen to his listen to his Substack. But you can because there's an interview, so there's interviews on there, or read his Substack. There's
Yeah.
chock full of information.
Yeah, a lot of great stuff in his book and in his on his Substack related to this whole new movement of how the future of independent cinema could sort of be reframed under this non-D model. So it's definitely a great interview.
Yeah, and there is good news though. I mean, the box office is up.
It
Believe it or
is.
not, the box office is up, and it's not up. Typically in these new day and age, at times, it's up whenever there's a Marvel film, a big tentpole film happens. These kind of big, and every so often there's a breakthrough, but it's up across the board, across genres. And so, I just saw The Devil Wears Prada over the weekend.
Was going to say that was a big one.
Yeah, that was
Although
a big one.
it is a sequel, technically a franchise, but a long time in the making. That one. That's what, like 20 years since the original
Yeah, 20
came
years
out.
since the original. For me, that was my industry, because I started as a model, Italy and all these things. Milan, a lot of it was in Milan. I lived in Milan. I lived that, walked the runway and all these things. And then I also have a degree in fashion design. And so for me, it was like, wow, you can really feel that movie. A lot of people felt it. It made a ton of money. And that's not a big tentpole film. I guess you could say it's a sequel, so maybe they'll have another one. But it did really well at the box office. And another film that did really well at the box office at the same time and the week before was Michael, a
That's right.
biopic.
Yes, yeah, that small little former pop star, may he rest in peace.
Yeah,
Just
he did a couple
he
of
he did all
things.
right, but yes, monster numbers for Michael as well. Especially internationally. Obviously, he was a global superstar, right? So he has fans literally all over the world, and so made a lot of sense for that. So that's good for obviously for Lionsgate and Universal that I think teamed up on the distribution of that film. So it did numbers and even originals like, shout out to local hero Phil Lord and Project Hail Mary doing very well
Just
still at the box
killing it.
office. And
Killing it.
that's great. It's an IP, but it's an original IP, that it's not the third, fourth, fifth installment of the Project Hail Mary franchise. So it's great to see original films that don't have a huge movie track record doing well at the box office.
Yeah, and Ryan Gosling said it himself. He's like, look, we have to look inward and just do better and make better films. And so I think I love the big extravaganza tentpole films, blow up everything, but not everyone does. And I think that that is, a big problem, actually, that we lost some of the other films, some of the other genres, some of the other types of films. And so now I think that you're seeing a lot of this. There are other issues, tickets cost a lot of money, popcorn, all those things, it's an expensive way to go. And I just saw a report, and this is, it is part of our industry. Ticket sales are down for music artists, so concerts. They call it the blue dot. You look at the Ticketmaster, and
Right.
there's a lot of blue dots. And so things just cost a lot of money
That's the thing.
now.
Like these concerts are so expensive.
Concerts are
Also,
expensive, so any, event experience has just really become expensive.
it's a
Mo-
premium market there.
yeah, but movies have always, stood as the lower cost part of this. And now, movies have become more the movie
Depending how many kids you
experience.
have, that's the thing.
Yeah, the kids you have, or you're going on a date, or whatever. Yeah, if you go by yourself, okay, but typically, people are doing other things and going with other people, and so this is bucking the trend. Really incredible product is out in the market, and it's across the board. And Generation Z is leading the way, actually, and so that's a great sign. So I wanted to
Yeah.
at least, kind of bring in a little bit of the positive, or a lot of the positive.
Well, the other thing about Gen Z, and you've mentioned before, is that they're starting, we've talked about it before, they're starting to buy physical media. They actually like
Yeah.
DVDs and VHS. And the VHS, the video store is actually making a
A
comeback in certain
video store is
places.
making a comeback. Blockbuster is punching the air right now.
Wouldn't it be
Yeah.
ironic if the next group of major video stores are Netflix branded? Can you imagine?
I
They
bet
start
that's going to happen. Yep. That probably
go
is going
back
to
to their
happen.
rental days.
That's right. Blockbuster could have bought Netflix. They're punching the air about that. And now VHS, which is making a comeback, they're opening video stores. In back to the, the record industry, vinyl is the fastest growing. It's like $1 billion, over
Yeah.
$1 billion in sales last year. So it's the
Yeah.
fastest growing sector. So people want that physical media back
Yeah,
these
there's definitely a
days.
sense of streaming fatigue, particularly with younger audiences, because everyone thought they were saving money by cutting the cable cord, right? But then now you have Netflix is over $20 a month. You have Disney Plus, you have to have Peacock, you have to have HBO now, Max, Paramount Plus, whatever that thing's going to be called. And just to access different movies that you could have just, one time buy a DVD, a VHS, and you have it
You have it
forever.
forever.
So
Yeah,
it
because you don't
definitely
own, even when you buy the digital copies, you're just licensing it. And
correct.
there was, a lawsuit where what was it, AOL, one of these services, legacy services, they did digital purchases of movies, and then they cut that division. And so all these people who bought these digital copies,
Right.
they don't have them anymore. And so
They could have at least mailed them a DVD like Netflix used to
you
do.
would
So
think,
that
it's
would have been a
definitely
nice courtesy.
I have to go and I have to go and look and see which one it was, but it's still around. It's not like, one of these services that totally went out of business. So, speaking of legacy and traditions and Netflix, of all companies, Netflix is opening up now in the traditional space. They're going to have a theatrical run, a long theatrical run, 2 months,
Yeah.
and that's for the next Greta Gerwig film, uh,
Yeah.
Chronicles of Narnia.
Yes, that's been discussed for a while, and that's going to be like a Christmas release, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it's going to be a big one for Netflix, and like we were saying, a little flirty flirt with the old Warner Brothers deal. See if they can win some fans back over there. Say, hey, we got some theatrical over
You
here.
throw it in their
Got
face,
some
like.
sexy Chronicles of Narnia going on for an extended release. Think
Yeah,
about
man. Yeah, 'cause that could be. That could be. They want to show WB what you could have had.
what you could have had.
Yeah, yeah. But what we do have right now is an amazing, amazing interview. This is, you know, for me, one of the best features of the Miami Film Festival. Thank you, JL Martinez, for doing such a tremendous job as you always do. And without further ado, we're going to give you some hope.
Yes, thanks, man. Yeah, definitely. David gave us a little bit of hope during the festival. So excited for all of our screen heaters to listen to it.
Ted Hope.
Ted, just, let's start at the beginning. Let's have a chat. Tell us a little bit about yourself for folks that don't know who you are and what you mean to the world of independent cinema and films in general.
That's right. Pat myself on the back.
Yes.
I've been in the business about 40 years. I've produced over 70 films. If the noise in my head starts bothering you, let me know, okay?
That was intentional.
I was an executive on close to that same number. I've started several production companies, post-production companies, sales company, streaming services. I ran movies for Amazon, launched their film program in 2014. And I write obsessively on Substack, a newsletter called Hope for Film. Hope for Film. And if we come up with a good name, I'll give you guys all a 50% discount off of a year's subscription if you want it. But you got to tell me, someone's got to hand me the special code that I'll call the discount, and I'll send it to you afterwards.
Yes,
if you want it.
We'll run
if you
through.
want a 50% discount. But it's crucial. That's pretty much what I think. I've long been a blogger, but I think that what I do on the newsletter, or some people have said, is, I speak loudly what other people only whisper. So I've been kind of helping to try to articulate what a alternative to the depressing times are about cinema and how to restore hope for film. And that has come to be a movement that I got to name as NONDI, to the chagrin of some people, but that's non-dependent, but it has a long E over the E, so it's very difficult to type because all good things should be something you have to work a little bit for. That little bit of annoyance is how the pearl gets made in the oyster, so that's what that symbolizes. And I just thought it was cool, and it's exceeded my dreams because there's a lot of stuff that is happening where people have recognized that we're in a major hinge moment, a moment of change, and perhaps the existing ecosystem and what we called independent film never was independent, but highly dependent and actually highly restrictive. And for about 15 years now, I think people have been speaking up and saying it only makes sense to budget for your own distribution and marketing, but really no one does it. And I know how hard it is for me to do that. But my wife and I have been leading the distribution of her film for the last 2.5 years. And this is a movie that people said could never make money and never would get seen. And we've done about a 2.5x multiple on the equity. And next month it airs on public television, which will have about 90% carriage. So that's about 100 million households. And so for a movie that is about impact, I think it's a pretty damn successful method. And I've been sharing the learnings because I've learned a lot. 40 years, I'm still learning. And I've learned a lot of how there is a different approach. You're going to have to interrupt me because I just keep going on and on.
I like it.
And one of those key learnings that really, like, there were a couple of things as I entered the streaming world that kind of changed how I thought about things, and kind of is an interesting way to say about, like, what makes this moment different and why can we have hope for film. not the newsletter, but the overall. And when I got to run a startup streaming platform called Fandor, it still exists.
Sure.
And it was in like 2013 in San Francisco. So it was like the height of that startup culture. And we had about 42 employees, and 25% of them had been involved in successful startups. So we had 25% of our workforce were millionaires, right? And they were just there to see, would this next thing work? So they had no hesitation coming up to me, the CEO, and giving me, I think the polite word is shit, right? You know, like, Ted, do you know what you're doing? And I'd be like, yeah, I'm running this movie streaming platform. No, you're not. You're running a audience aggregation platform. You know how to build audiences, don't you? And I was like, make something good? And they were like, no, you build audiences by having a regular cadence of supply at a consistent quality level in an environment that people trust and want to participate in. I got that tattooed on my back. So
Tattoo.
because you have to think about that. That's really true about so many different things. That regular cadence of supply at a consistent quality in an environment people trust and want to participate in. That kind of changed my outlook on so many different things that I do. I've always been a collaborator. My companies have always been co-ops or partnerships, partially, as I realize now, because how else are you going to do that regular cadence, right? That's really like, what is a regular cadence? Well, you expect it's coming soon somehow, right? Not once every 3 years, not even once a year, but soon. So trying to figure that out has led to a lot of the decisions that I've made. And then there was something else that was like, I was going to say something else, and then I remember that one. The other big change, where was I? I was talking about...
We were talking about your brief bio.
Yeah, and I got distracted. We'll come back to that. Hold that thought. That's step one.
But I wanted to take a step back even further and just kind of like, because obviously I always think that, what happens in the past always reverberates in the future. So when you first started making independent films, let's say it was when you co-founded Good Machine in the late 80s, early 90s, what inspired you then to keep going and to keep doing this thing? And what mindset existed at the time for independent film?
I think I have to take it back 2 steps from there. I'd fallen in love with movies and I was ashamed of it, right? And I think that was really helpful. Like my life got changed. I grew up in a working class environment. It was a troubled place, and I got a scholarship to a private high school. And all of a sudden, I was around super smart people who had tremendous means and just wanted to go run their parents' company and have a martini by 5 o'clock. And I was like, how did I get in this place? I'm so fortunate. I want to do something. I want to change the world. And my mom saw when, like, day one of school, they're showing this movie, The Grand Illusion by Jean Renoir. You might want to check it out. And I went to see it, and there was one other kid in the theater. And I was blown away, right? It's a movie about the World War I, and hopefully there will never be a war again. It didn't quite work out that way. Right. But it was novelistic, and I was super moved, and I was like, wow. But I was going to change the world. That was my goal, and I didn't know anyone in the business. I never heard of anyone going into the business. I thought it was out of my reach. And I'm a restless sort. And when I went to college, I dropped out soon after because I wanted to be in the action. And I started working in community organizing politics. And I was pretty good at it. So they sent me on the road. And so I'm a 19-year-old kid, not knowing anybody anywhere. And, I didn't really drink. That was about the only option in most of these places I went to, except to go see movies. And this was in the early 80s. And I know a lot of people like Tony Scott's movies and other folks who made movies in the 80s, but I didn't. And I was getting really angry. And I found this music, punk rock, right? And so, wow, that's how I feel. So and they have this kind of ethos that, you can just pick up a guitar and yell and, your community will come out for you. So those two aspects of community organizing started working their way into my bloodstream. And I went to movies obsessively, and I didn't like them. I was really angry at those movies. So I was like, I can make better movies, and I had no knowledge of how. I applied to NYU Film School and forgot about it. And then one day I got a nice ride to go to NYU Film School. And I arrived the year that She's Gotta Have It, Blood Simple, Stranger Than Paradise. And the year before, the film that sent me to NYU was Smithereens by Susan Seidelman, which was a punk rock tale. And I was like, wow, that's what I want to make. These are all really small movies. They speak to me and about like the time I grew up in. But NYU, where all those filmmakers, every single one of those filmmakers went to, was teaching Hollywood filmmaking. There was no independent filmmaking yet. And you're like, wait, what's going on? They all found this thing. I want to be part of that. So I left school again. And it was the way those films were getting funded were through mistakes made at the highest level regarding new technology, which at that point was VHS videos.
Right.
That a lot of the movies that were made did not have the poetry that we put into contracts now, which is that language. I'm licensing this music for any technology now known or hereafter devised
throughout the universe into outer space.
Exactly, in all dimensions now, right? You couldn't watch John Sayles' "Baby It's You" because they didn't have the proper licensing for the Springsteen music that was in it. Right. But that meant they had already set up all the loans for the neighborhood video stores, and there was nothing on the shelves. So a lot of people came up with ways to make movies cheaper. There was better technology and get them quickly on the shelves. And so I worked on a lot of really bad horror films as a production assistant. And you got the idea, like, wait a second, we could borrow some of these methodologies. I got to produce my first movie at 23, which was a big break, but I quit the business after that because everybody was on drugs. They were fighting with each other. It was like, the world doesn't need more young film producers. They need drug counselors. I'm going to go be a drug counselor. You have to study for that. And that wasn't one of my strong suits. So I got pulled back in for an incredible opportunity producing a movie that had $100,000 budget, no script, no location, no cast, had to shoot in 4 weeks from then, but they had a title. Okay. It was the incredible rituals of the undead leather witches from hell.
Short title.
We actually figured out what the movie was. We had to change the title. It came out as Doom Asylum. Okay. And I was really embarrassed about it until I saw that, I'm not going to get her name right, forgive me, but one of the actresses from Sex and the City, it was her first role. Okay. And she had it on her resume. And I was like, if she can own it, I can own it. Right. And the funny thing, like, it was one of those films that got licensed by HBO and people fell in love with it because it was so silly. Yeah. Right. We had to come up with a movie. We found an insane asylum that had been abandoned. And it was like, what can we shoot in 4 weeks from now? How about it's high school graduation, 4 good kids and 4 bad kids all go to party at the insane asylum. Sure. And guess what's there? A monster. Of course. Right. It was a silly film, but it had its, spirit, right? And I would tell my friend who I wanted to produce movies of how we did that. And his cousin was working on another bunch of micro-budget, stupid movies that always would sign Lance Hendrickson to come star, the guy from the Alien movies. They would sign him to a contract to shoot 4 movies in 4 days. One as like a mafia guy, one as a Civil War guy, one as a science fiction, and just run them through costumes, and then hire a bunch of film students. Figure out how all these different actors who we had do the same costume changes could all be in the same movie together. Make it all fit, and we'll cast somebody to connect them.
Yeah. That's great.
And the guy that we would tell that to was a director named Hal Hartley. And I spent about 3 years trying to make what we thought were real movies with him until he got fed up with me. And he said one day, come to Grand Central Station. I want to show you where I grew up. It's a little weird for your friend to say that, I did. And he handed me a script on the train and said, I just wrote this 2 weeks ago. I know where every location is, and I know where the sun is at the time of day because I wrote it for the 2 blocks that I grew up in. And that was a movie called The Unbelievable Truth. It cost us $55,000 to get it into the can. We shot short ends, pre-video, 35 millimeter. We shot a 2-to-1 ratio. 2-to-1 ratio. And it cost us another $100,000 to finish the film afterwards. But we sold it to an upstart distributor by a guy named Harvey Weinstein for $250,000. We didn't know enough to put anybody on contract. Everyone was non-union. And on December 23rd, we distributed the profit. So everyone got a full union wage for the 11 or 12 days they worked on the movie. And
we call that deferred now.
but it was quick ultimately along the way. And the remarkable thing on that movie, 22 people went on to direct feature films. Wow. Right? I don't know if anyone watched the Rick Linklater movie on Netflix called there we go. Yes. Thank you. Nouvelle Vague on the French New Wave. And at the end of it, it's about the making of Jean-Luc Godard's Breathless. And at the end of it, they explain that over that next year, 179 people went on to make feature films. So we didn't quite hit those numbers, but amongst the 22 people were our wardrobe supervisor, Kelly Reichardt. People that, there was a good group of people who went out and made movies. Granted, one of them made a movie called Surf Nazis Must Die, but
they should. Damn surf Nazis.
But, a lot got made. And I think it spoke of how when you come together for passion, when you're willing to do things for love together in a collaborative way, it kind of changes the rules. We wanted to make another movie right after that. We didn't have the money. Everyone showed up to work on that film. We got the money within 2 months. That was our second film. We got up to a $700,000 budget. Hal Hartley, that director, is very much what I would call a non-D director now. He owns all of his movies. He distributes his movies. He works with a really small footprint and does exactly what he wants to do with no one telling him what to do. And so you start to see that you can find, if you can spot some cracks and find your way, that's where the light gets in.
Right. So essentially you're describing the indie film school at this point, right? Versus the studio system.
Yeah, we definitely liked the vibe that we saw in Spike Lee's and Coen Brothers, John Seideman's movies. And you start to see, the phrase I use is like, how do you let somebody's freak flag fly? How do you get them to encourage whatever is the unique aspect of them, the decisive element that makes it pop, that nobody else can replicate? And those were all of our early movies. And it is so similar to this moment we're living in now in a couple of ways. One of the reasons it's hard for somebody to break into the industry, where it's hard for somebody to make films for grown-ups or makes films for a super specific audience, is there's a huge differential in the marketplace right now, where the perceived value of a film is much lower than the actual value of a film. You know, the irony of these times that we live in is it's easier to get your film out, but a lot harder to get your film seen, right? You know, and how do we start to deal with that? Like, I'm pretty good at predicting, you know, the different budget levels you can make a film for and predicting the different values that the world will assign to them. And I can tell you right now, the gulf between perceived value and actual value is somewhere between 40 and 60% on the basis. So what happened back in the late 80s, early 90s was because of the technology changing, because people starting to recognize how to make movies inexpensively, there was an abundance of supply. And that helped change that differential, right? So in the beginning, we wouldn't get paid what our films were worth, but you did have a profit participation. So we made this movie early on that nobody believed in, right? We raised the money for it the way that we always raise money for our film, which was to cut the budget in half, right? And it's like, oh, you have half the funding? We can complete the funding for you. How? Cut the budget in half, you know. And we made this film. It was the first film cut on an Avid, the nonlinear digital editing, first narrative feature. They made the Rumble in the Jungle or the Muhammad Ali Foreman fight film on an Avid, but we were the first narrative to do it. And as a result, we didn't quite know what we were doing, and we didn't get a print out of the lab until the day we had to send it off to the film festivals. We got into the festival of choice for us, which was the Berlin Film Festival. Big deal. No sales agent would touch it. We shipped it off to sales agents, and they were like, "We don't want this film. It's gay. It's Chinese, and it feels like a film from the 1940s." Right? Like, I'm not going to touch it. Well, that film won the Golden Bear Grand Prize at the Berlin Film Festival. It was Ang Lee's The Wedding Banquet. Yep. It was just recently remade into a more modern movie. And it was the film that had the highest ROI of any movie that year. It did a 42 times multiple. The number two film, however, if you just took 1%, it would have been worth something like 700% of our money, right? 1% of that movie. That was a little movie called Jurassic Park. They didn't do much with it afterwards. I think they hope to make a sequel one day. But the interesting thing was, because no one would sell it for us, we had to sell it ourselves. And we didn't really know what we were doing. We knew enough to think we knew enough to sell, but we probably didn't. In the first sales meeting I had with somebody who wanted to buy it, they said, "So what do you want to do with this?" I said, "Well," I didn't discuss this with my business partner. In the beginning, he wanted to kill me. Later, he loved me for it. I was like, "Well, we're only going to license it for 6 years to everybody." And the guy looked at me, and I think he evaluated that these guys won't be around very long. So he said, sure, son. I'll license it for 6 years. And so the next meeting was like, hey, you know, that guy from Australia who bought the film, we sold it to him on a 6-year license. We're only doing 6-year license. Everyone signed a 6-year license and proceeded to license it to their local television station on a 15-year contract. Wow. So in the 7th year, we started suing everybody. We had to actually bring 3 companies to court, but we collected twice that money because they had to pay us the same amount for the 2nd-year license.
They'd already committed to the local station.
So instead of a 42 times multiple, it was actually an 84 times multiple if you actually look at it, right? Still wasn't so much money, but it was still enough to keep my company going for a long time and recognize, you know, that, and this would be one of those lessons, that the art, the audience, the artists all move much faster than the business or the markets do. Like, we're taught in America that the marketplace is wise, it will always adjust, it will move so much faster, but it gets stuck in deep ruts in every industry. And you have to start to look at it and figure out, how do I fix the differential?
Yeah.
How do I fix like the way they're manipulating it against the people who don't have power? And how can I start to get ahead of the curve, get to where the puck is going to be, as Wayne Gretzky said. I think those things happen time and time again. And we're living in a moment where that differential is really high, where the power thinks is one way to do things, and yet there's a huge number of other ways to do things. We're fortunate that the technology on the manufacture and the distribution has improved so much, right? But it's in the hands of folks who want to just, for some reason, keep earning all the money they're earning, right?
Right.
So what can we start to do? I believe we're in another major disruption. People talk about global streaming as this huge disruption, but I think the disintermediation of distribution, the decentralization of distribution, is going to be the next big disruption. And we see this already in the big realms of the folks who had to already, from other cultural industries, had their business disintermediated. Cutting out the middleman is what that stupid word means, essentially, middle person. They recognized they needed to develop a direct relationship with their audience, right? So the most successful startup of a film studio in America is called Taylor Swift, right? That she already had her mailing list of millions and millions of fans and cut out the distributor twice now, and has had films that made over 30 million.
And that was with AMC, I think, theater,
Yeah,
right?
they went directly to AMC. And then just recently, Markiplier with Iron Lung did the same sort of thing. Now, they are folks who have spent years building their audiences and were successful in a different realm. But meanwhile, on the quiet level, whether it's our film with Invisible Nation, which you can come see here tomorrow night, I believe, at 7 p.m., outside of the festival, but that's because, we're a very old movie now, 2.5 years old. Or movies like Secret Mall Apartment or other things where filmmakers have done it. We're at a place where you can do that. Unfortunately, the support organizations that we haven't really trained all the service providers that we need to do this. Like, there's a learning gap that's there. I believe that there are actually about 300 jobs right now that are needed that would pay somewhere between $75,000 and $125,000 a year, which is pretty significant, particularly since you only would have to do it part-time. What are those jobs, right? Those jobs are filling in the gaps of what we allowed to rust and disappear. So this would be another one, like, how do you build audiences? In any closed ecosystem where the dominant power, capital, or audience believes the system is good enough, like, say, indie film, you won't have the necessary investment in the operational improvements of the product or the process. So what happens over time is, like, we're frogs in the pot, not realizing we're the next course for dinner, right? That you can look at many things. We're here now, my wife Vanessa and I, because we're on a sponsored college tour that we were able to raise money to do 20 different colleges with our film. Every independent film ends up going to colleges and has for 40 years. So let's just say that's 500 films a year for 40 years. And yet nobody captured that institutional knowledge so it could be replicable from one film to the next. Everybody has to reinvent the wheel. Let me tell you, it's a pain in the butt, right? To do. We partnered with a student organization. We partnered with a community organization. Both sides kind of invested in our movie from for different reasons, and we're able to bring the film around. And we knew we would be here, and so I reached out. Can I come and talk?
Yeah.
Because I like to talk.
No, you're quiet.
But like there are so many of these little things that are needed. We're airing on public television partially because our movie is really good and people wanted to see it, but also partially because I realized how that system was also broken and how we could improve it for ourselves. And hopefully, because I've now pitched American public television on this model, hopefully for about 12 other films a year going forward. We can talk about that later if people want on what that is. But again, nobody had to fix anything because they thought it was good enough. And you can see this so many different places, not the least of which, I've been singing the same song on Substack for 3 years, which is build your own audience. Build your own audience. So over those 3 years, I've been able to build a mailing list of 30,000 people across 175 countries. Now, granted, I'm an old guy. I've been around. I've done a bunch of stuff. I have some privilege that other people don't have. But Substack, when I joined, said to me they thought anyone that was bringing a movie out that had a product to sell could within 3 years build an audience of 25,000 people. I don't know if they'd say that today. The guy that said that to me left Substack last month. No, but frankly, to start a service helping people build their audience. This era where you will have a direct relationship with your audience is going to be super transformative. The disintermediation of distribution is a key part of that, as is you moving out of a transactional mindset, i.e., I have to sell tickets, I have to make money, and moving more into a community-minded way of thinking. So what we often talk about is, we first try to identify the customers, turn them into our audience, transition them into our community, and incentivize them to become our collaborators. That process, which means you have to look out for them. Right? That's what a community is, right? Here, right now, in this room, is you're saying, I'm going to cover your back to the person next to you. And when you start to do that, your possibilities become much more. Yeah. And that's what's so exciting about what's happening on what we call Film Stack, the community on Substack that cares about film, is it's really positioned where we're trying to be supportive, not just self-interested, trying to be transparent, collecting the data, sharing the recommended best practices, because frankly, that's what's needed, not just for you to work well in your career, but to preserve things like democracy, like, love, like working together. We have to do the things that bring us joy and pleasure and bring each other that, and recognize it's not all just about getting the money into our wallets, but in the process, sometimes that's what you get in return. And that's wonderful, Yeah. And I really do believe that with that, we can transition from what has been a cultural industry predicated on genius, right? And instead move to one that's about how do we lift the good into the better and perhaps the great, right? That if instead like when I examine movies over time, I see about 50 films a year that I really respect, that I think are really excellent films, consistent. And that's whether we make a ton of movies or we don't. That's the genius, right? Those 50 people across the globe who make remarkable movies every year. But watching like what happened through, peak content, the birth of the global streaming platforms and all the money that's in there, you saw a huge lift of the good, of the interesting, of the, this is relevant. And yet we never developed those processes to lift that good into something better, right? I went to the Toronto Film Festival when I still worked for Amazon, and I saw this remarkable movie. But it was kind of long and a little slow in parts, and some people were put off by certain elements. I was the only one that bid on that movie, right? I offered a very fair price because Amazon let me, and I said to the director, I'm giving you creative control, but I want you to sit with me because I think there's 20 minutes that can come out of the movie.
Right.
He was protected. He knew that he didn't have to agree to anything. We took 20 minutes out of the movie. It won the Oscar for Best Editing and Best Sound. It was made for $2 million, called The Sound of Metal. It got 5 Oscar nominations. And, that's not me, right? That was all for the, my notes were in accordance with the film that I saw for the director's voice. And they recognized what I recognized. They had a rush to get into the festival,
Right.
but most people would stop. They would say that movie debuted, it's good enough, don't bother. Producing for excellence is labor and it's time intensive and it's strain, passion. And I need a glass of water.
Right, yeah, we'll grab a couple of waters. But it's interesting, and mention the name, and obviously not, but something that Weinstein's used to do all the time, right? Is
To some degree.
To some degree,
yeah.
To re-edit the films or to make them a little more poppy for that environment.
But to understand the difference of that, right? I made a film called In the Bedroom with Todd Field. It was, let's see my senior grip.
Feel like a reporter now.
Like that film In the Bedroom was originally made for $2.5 million. And then we got a Academy Award winning composer to agree to do the score for free. So that was another $350,000. That usually gets a laugh. I guess I didn't deliver it right.
Nobody had coffee like we did, I guess that's what it is.
But we sold that film at the Sundance Film Festival to Harvey Weinstein. We knew we had 2 minutes to cut out of the movie. The contract with Harvey said that I had final cut. I told Todd, you have to recognize we're entering the beast, and it's a culture that they will cut up your movie, right? But we can preserve it. And in the end, we have to keep our eye on the prize, which is make sure the movie comes out and they support it, right? He took out a second mortgage, right? He developed a double bleeding ulcer trying to protect this film because although we had a release date in November, it was August and they had cut up the movie several times, tested it several times. Our cut kept performing better and Harvey wouldn't let up. Right. And we didn't know what to do. And luckily, I knew I had a war story somewhere. There were people at the company who really believed in the movie. And they told us, OK, this is what you have to do. Todd, you have to fly from L.A. to New York. Tomorrow night, Harvey's having dinner with Marty at this spot. You have to go in, pretend that you just walked in, and Harvey will have you sit down and talk. And then you got to get Marty to agree to watch your movie. Right.
Wow.
And Todd's in it. For those, he also made the movie Tar and Little Children. Yeah. He's a master, but he was also an actor. He was in Eyes Wide Shut and many other films. We cast him off of Ruby in Paradise, a nice Florida movie. Previously, he did a movie, the first film I did with Nicole Hollow Center. He was in that. And Todd was able to, do that kind of
like an episode of The Studio. So now you got these guys having
except
dinner.
It's real life. It's funny
to walk in.
Vanessa, loves that show. I can't watch it because, I'm sorry, people that work in the business are much smarter than those characters on TV.
You dumb them down a little bit.
But Harvey agreed to let Marty watch it and decide. And I was thrilled because I got to call Thelma Schumacher and say, what did you think? And she said, oh, we really love the movie, but we have some notes. Oh, great. Can you tell me what they are? She said, let me talk to Marty and get back to you. 1 day goes by, 2 days, 3 days. It's a week. What's happening? Finally, Thelma calls and said, we can't talk. You know, we love the movie. Yes, there's some work, but we're not going to get involved in this. Harvey called us into the office, and, you know, this is a while back, right? So he had these lineup of all these video decks, one full wall, you know, top to bottom of video decks. And he said, all right, here's what's going to happen. I can't do voices, so I'm not going to do it. But we're going to play your version against my version and decide which one is better. And like the first cut, he shows this, and I was like, Harvey, I know you love movies, but that was such an inelegant cut. Like, we'll lose the audience on that first cut. He was like, shut the fuck up, Hope. Threw something at me, right? You know, and he was like, you know, I was going to ask you to produce my first feature, but now I'm going to ask Anthony Minghella to do it because, you know, his movies aren't, you know, half as long as yours. They're twice as long, Harvey, twice as long. But, and I didn't let on. I knew that Harvey had already directed a movie, and people thought he was, you know, such a distribution genius. He made a movie called, I think it was called Playing for Keeps. It was a Jewish family movie that they released on Yom Kippur. If you're such a good distributor, like, why are you releasing it on that day? But like,
Go to see it.
you know, like, or maybe he didn't want anyone to see
Possibly.
it. You know, at least he was letting it go. But in the end, you know, after 3.5 hours, you know, of back and forth, and we're only like 30 minutes into the film, he said, okay, you guys win. Your film can stand, but you have to cut 2 minutes out of it, which was what was in our contract, which is what we wanted to do anyways. And the crazy thing was, like, we realized he was chasing his 11th Best Picture nomination in a row. His other films were The Shipping News, which if anyone saw that movie, you know that it wasn't going to get an Oscar nomination. And Amelie, which is a super beautiful film, but at that point in time, Americans would never vote for a foreign language, a non-English language film for Best Picture, so it didn't even get in that race. So we were his last bet. But that little movie, which he paid $1 million for, that cost a total of close to $3 million, he spent $22 million trying to get nominations. It made $30 million at the box office, but that doesn't mean you get $22 million back. And he got 5 nominations on it, which up until movies like Moonlight, another Florida movie,
There you go.
and elsewhere, was one of the lowest budgeted films to get, you know, a ton. So
Wow. So you won that battle.
I won that battle. And that's in my book if you happen to find a copy of it anywhere.
Yeah, hope for film. So that's interesting because it's kind of like you're breaking down everything that has to do with, you know, this structure and this process. But going back to this non-D idea, because I think a lot of folks here who are in that space now wondering what to do with their film, if they have a film in the festival or they're developing their next project. What are some of the key points to kind of follow this new practice to get their films out there properly into the world?
I've been trying to capture what all that may be. And I found it, you know, I always find it curious of like what we hold inside of ourselves without giving voice and when that voice comes out. So I'd written out like 24 components before I found the most important one, which I only wrote about recently. So number 25, you know, doesn't sound like a business or even a creative idea, but I actually think it's both. And that is making sure you structure it so that you enjoy the process. I think that if you look at the last 20 years is when we really moved to fully a transactional obsession, you know, of our culture. We push that away. Like so many people, whether that's like, I'm storyboarding my whole movie and doing exactly what's in my storyboard. So no, you know, serendipity gets
Happy
to come along.
accidents.
Yeah, no happy accidents along the way. Or, you know, like you start to see, you know, the folks that think, you know, art is like war. You know, we like, I'm the general and you have to follow what I say and we all have to, it's life and death. I would say no. We're playing in the sandbox, right? And you want to do that. There's a filmmaker that my wife got to interview recently that has a film that just came out named Pete O's, right? That he's working. He spent 7 years making his first film and trying to get $200,000, and he had a miserable experience. And he decided from then on he wanted to try to do it in a way that was joyful. And that meant for him learning how to make movies for $10,000. And he has a beautiful metaphor, I think, for explaining it, which is he says, like, each movie is a table of bubbles. It can take no pressure whatsoever other than keeping it afloat, right? Like, wow. and he shoots and he edits. He works from more of a treatment than a script. He brings the actors in. And he makes them so that in the end, if they don't work, there's no great loss. And, you know, when I was my most active producing, you know, and this is true like across studio executives and so on, I had a 1 in 8, 10x multiple. Right. So 1 out of every films did 10 times. So you do the math and you're like in profit across all those movies. And that's kind of what he's thinking there is not every one of these movies have to come out, but I need to have one in the group do really well. And I loved his new movie, which is called Erupcja. I don't speak Polish, but it's eruption in Polish. In the festival. There you go. Well programmed, as you should. This is what's happening. Exactly. And, you know, so I think that when I was trying to put out principles of Nandi, I wasn't budget obsessed at that point, right? Okay. I didn't think that was such a necessary, but I do think that if we can make our work in a way that removes some of that pressure at a significant level, you're able to bring back in a different type of playfulness. Yeah. And that does probably mean we need to find side hustles, so, you know, other ways to earn our livings along the way, which might be those services that I mentioned in the beginning that are missing from our ecosystem. And, but I think like it starts to change the whole concept of who gets to make movies and why, so that we actually are able to make movies for our communities, right? And then we can start to develop the infrastructure that is needed to make sure our communities get that regular cadence of supply at a consistent quality in an environment that they trust and want to participate in. When I look at distribution, I see a cookie cutter checklist way that we go about doing it, like 4 different models, which require that our films cover the mainstream, right? Cover things that connect all of us. Right. I don't want to make He-Man Masters of the Universe, and I would argue that doesn't really connect us, right? I always like those super specific niche films, right? Christine Vachon, one of the great indie producers, you know, has a line, you know, that we used to both use, but it was her line. I have to give her credit. That how do you determine, this was like at 2000, how do you determine who to make a movie for? And it was like, do they have a parade? If they're getting together for a parade, we'll make a movie for them, right? But I actually think it's much more narrow than that. And in that specificity is where you find universality, right?
Agreed.
Yeah. So like the wedding banquet story, nobody wanted it because they thought it was too specific. Yeah. But the truth is everyone saw their family in it, right? Whether it was they were gay, whether they were Chinese, whether they'd seen a lot of films from the 40s, they still saw their story in it. I believe we've gotten trapped in this rut where, you know, whether it's Save the Cat or The Hero's Journey or any of these other textbooks, we start to see the formula, right? Why is there a huge surge in repertory cinema amongst young people? Because films from the 90s and before didn't feel so corporately programmed.
Yeah.
They had a freakiness to them, something that made you a little uncomfortable, sometimes cringe. What it is? How do we get to that place where we don't feel we're just trying to make it palatable, but we're speaking truth, right?
Yeah. No, and that makes a lot of sense because, and another thing that the festival does great is program so many amazing local films. You know, Miami stories told kind of for Miamians in a sense. And so you're saying that that's not a lost cause. That's actually the future of creating those types of stories.
Absolutely. And I think the more that we start to get specific to different communities and supply that cadence, the more they'll start showing up, right? There's that real benefit. And, you know, when I work on a script, one of the things that I try to do is help the project speak secret languages.
Okay.
Right. You know, that's just a phrase I use, but what is that trying to say? Instead of an A theme and a B theme, I look at like 25 themes. Right. And I'm not looking to pay them off. I'm not looking to give them an arc. I'm asking them to speak to the audience and let them feel seen and heard because somehow we connect. Right? Like I know that there are a lot of times that I see a little thing and I think it's just there for me, my own private Easter egg.
Sure.
Right. And I think we want to plant those. When I work, I have a time in the development process where I'm trying to heighten the cinematic potential of the script. And that's looking through different references, visually, audio, looking at the different elements of a character, you know, and trying to make that stuff sing. Yeah. You know, like I think, you know, I don't want to just know what their wants or their goals are, you know, what they might have longing for. You know, I want to understand the gulf between their thought and expression. Why haven't they done this thing that they want? What might that be? And let me see a little clue, because maybe it speaks to my own, you know, experience on that way. And I think the more that we give that deeper humanity, the more we protect ourselves from what's coming, from the abundance of slop that will become. And you know, I use it to help my processes along the way. I don't think we necessarily have to be afraid of it, but we have to be able to say, damn it, I love that I'm a weird little human, and I'm going to use that to connect with other weird little humans.
Yeah, and it makes sense because I always say like AI is always in the pursuit of perfection, I see. And what makes some of these stories great is the human imperfections, right? The things where AI would tell you to go right, but you go left, and an audience actually reacts more to that because it feels personal and real. And that's something that I don't think any computer can replicate still. That's awesome. This talk helped people tremendously. And I said at the beginning that thank you guys. Thank you for coming. Unlike Miami, we started early, but just like Miami, we're finishing late. So we got it. Thank you guys so much for coming. Thank you, Ted, for doing this talk. I appreciate it.
All right, we're back. That was fire, man.
Yes, that is a lot of hope.
Yes. Yeah, he definitely laid things out in a very interesting way. And like I said, really understanding where the industry is going and with all the consolidation, all the streaming, all the sort of technology and AI that's being forced on the industry to know that there is another way particularly for what I guess we used to call independent filmmakers. Now we call them non-dependent filmmakers, non-D filmmakers, to kind of make their own way, to create their own path. You know, and I think that is very important, particularly for the filmmakers and producers and the MMFMers that were at the festival, the filmmakers, all the Screen Heat people that were there, to really absorb that message and create this community, even in Miami, that can be self-sustaining and not so dependent on, like you were mentioning in the intro, the gatekeepers of the world, and kind of forge your own path.
Yeah, and you know, I just want to kind of go back to what I was saying about the gatekeepers. You know, it's a tough thing because it's a system that's been set up over time. The people that are part of the system, you know, like I said, it's like a machine. And so, you know, you just keep the engines going. It's maybe no fault of, you know, the people that are part of the mechanization of the motion of these things, because it's just the way that it is. But what we can do as content creators, as filmmakers, and people that tell stories, is we can find ways to get our stories out there in unique and interesting ways that connect to the audiences directly. I mentioned Markiplier, but the list goes on and on. Mr. Beast. Um, you know, I would even say someone, even though Taylor Swift is part of the,
Well, yeah, Ted mentioned that she's the biggest independent film studio is Taylor Swift, right?
yeah,
And she had that deal with AMC, and obviously, again, someone similar to Markiplier, but obviously in the music world, she draws such a massive audience and eyeballs all over the world, like, we were talking about Michael Jackson as well. And it just having that built in audience that can drive eyeballs. And especially now with social media, that she can speak directly to her audience, they can speak back to her. It makes it so much sense for her to self distribute her movies through AMC and other venues as opposed to going through the traditional path now. But the gatekeepers have done traditionally, and I agree, is also a level of quality control, right? Because it's not just a free for all. Ideally in the industry, the cream rises to the top, right? It doesn't always happen. That's why bad films get made all the time and good ones sit in a drawer somewhere for years. But I do think that within this non-D model as well, there is going to be, what Ted alluded to is to try to make the good better, the better great. And I think that that's a continuous sort of cycle of every film you make, even if you're self-funding it, try to make it better, try to make it for the audience something that they respond to, something that can help build your audience. Because at the end of the day, nobody wants to watch a bad movie, whether it's a studio film or whether it's a Taylor Swift movie or whether it's, a non-D movie that costs 10 grand or whatever. Everybody wants to see a good story at the end of the day.
yeah. Look at my hat.
You
Can,
can do it.
can, can.
It's
The
coming.
lineup is out.
Yes, it's back to the auteur days, according to Variety, right? So, got a lot of interesting filmmakers making their way to the Quaset starting May 12th.
Pedro
That,
Almodovar, one of my biggest
yes,
influences.
Pedro Almodovar.
The way you
He's
said it.
definitely,
Yes.
yes, yeah. So, some of the other guys that honestly I can't pronounce as well because it seems like to be an auteur director nowadays, you have to have 14 consonants in your name. So, we got Asghar
It's a story
Farhadi,
just to say the name.
Hirokazu Koreda,
That's pretty good.
amongst others. Yes,
Uh,
Ira Sachs, that was a pretty easy one. So they've all got films going to Cannes this year, and so let's see, how it unfolds. There's also an AI movie going to Cannes this year. We'll see how that does with the very very sort of French audience that I don't know if that's going to go over that well, but we'll see how that
how did
does.
it get in the first place? They're very much about. You said
Right.
the auteur. They're very
Yeah,
much
the
about the
auteur.
auteur.
Right. Yeah. So how does the first open AI produced feature film? It's called Critters, and it's actually a family film that was used a lot of open AI's tools. So it's interesting. It's still, it's about a $30 million budget that they spent on it. Um, so we'll see if that but although they say that if they would have done it the old-fashioned way, it would have cost much more than
Yeah,
30
much more. Of
million.
course, it would have.
But let's see if if it gets the same reception as a more traditional animated film would have gotten at Cannes.
Yeah, well, a lot of people are waiting. This is not just, I mean, we framed this in the can conversation, but this could have been a topic on its own. A lot of people are waiting to see what happens with that film.
Yeah, and interesting because a lot of us have read that Sora has basically been shuttered at OpenAI. The deal with Disney with Sora and OpenAI also kind of went away, and so it's kind of like this film is coming out just as some of those previous deals have been winding down. And so, will this spark new life into that world, or will it just be kind of the final nail in the coffin again that people want to see human-made stuff?
Yeah, but I do think that there's a groundswell of support for humans. So that's one
Yeah,
thing. OpenAI, they shut down Sora more because of resources, because they had to allocate their resources towards their enterprise,
right.
which is ChatGPT and these kind of models that you know enterprise clients use. But I do foresee Sora coming back at some point. And look, my companies, we will probably never do an entire AI based film. For me, they're just as I'm interested to see this too. So I would have loved to have gone to Cannes this year, even just to see this film. But we just can't get the specificity, the specificity that I like as not just a company owner, but as a filmmaker, as someone who knows what I want specifically.
Right.
And I just can't do it with AI. There's some
Yeah.
things that AI has helped with, shortcuts and these kind of things. But to do a whole film, I don't know. I just want to see, let's see what they have done. Still, $30 million is nothing to sneeze at. That's
That's what
still
I'm saying.
a
Yeah.
pretty hefty
Still
budget.
a
So
decent sized budget for sure. And yeah, I think, with AI as a tool, as part of the producer or the filmmaker's toolkit, obviously it serves a purpose, whether we're just going to hand over the entire reins of filmmaking and storytelling to an AI machine. I just don't see that happening in the near future, which hopefully it doesn't happen.
no, I mean they didn't. It's not like they just typed in. They took the script and
Right.
then they punched it into the AI and
Which is what
here
you
you
think of,
go.
right? Like with AI, it's like, yeah, you have a filmmaker just typing in the elements of a story, and this beautiful 2 hour film comes out, right? It doesn't really work that way,
Uh,
and I don't think it will, honestly, like, again, for the foreseeable future. But to help reduce costs in post production and VFX, in you know, even in budgeting and different ways of setting up your production and streamlining things using AI tools, obviously that's here. That's probably not going to go away, and that kind of helps the process along and maybe even helps get more films made down the road. So in that sense, could be a good thing. But like everything else with technology, it's always a double-edged sword.
yeah. So, oh, there is one more. There's one more. This also is something that would give hope. There's one more film. What is the name of that movie? Yeah, so it's a movie called Backrooms. And so Backrooms, the filmmaker, his name is Kane Parsons. And so Kane, over some years, he made this YouTube channel and he used Blender to make these kind of ecosystem that served his horror. It's like a horror genre, served his horror content. And so it just became so popular that A24 picked it up. And they then decided to produce a film based off of this content. The content is really, really popular. And so they're in production right now. But the big kicker is he's the youngest filmmaker to have a film produced by A24. He's 20 now. He was 19 when
Wow.
they picked it, maybe even 18, when they picked up the film or when they picked up the project. And then they developed it over time. And there's a lot of buzz and excitement about this particular, because it has a big following already. And
Right.
so, look at this. When you put together, something like a Markiplier that has a
Yeah.
following, and then I don't want to say A24 is a legacy media company, but they've done okay over the past
Yeah, everyone's saying they're like the new Miramax, the new Weinstein
yeah,
company.
the
So
Weinstein
that
company.
prestige label, even though there's competition from folks like Neon, right?
Yeah.
That's kind of dipping their toes, doing very well in that market recently with the Oscar wins and stuff. But yeah, definitely A24 is still kind of that really prestige indie studio that has some great filmmakers and auteurs of their own that they work with.
Yeah.
And they're getting younger apparently. So I'm may have to
Yeah.
produce my 6-year-old, get him to direct a movie maybe next year, and
There you
then
go.
I'll have the record.
Yeah, but I mean that's a great story. A story of this new model and this new world where you can create your own following, and then having that following allows you then to get your content out and through traditional means. A24 is maybe not your most traditional company, but they are definitely within the pantheon of old Hollywood studios or Hollywood studio. They're in the Hollywood studio system.
Right.
And so I wanted to kind of leave it with that, a success story.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So we are successfully back in the game.
Yeah.
I'm
Hitting
Kevin
our stride.
Sharpley,
I'm JL Martinez.
Screen Heat Miami.
Yes. And we are always brought to you by
Exec
Chemical,
Multimedia.
MMFM.
I'm going to say Chemical again because I kind of ate it. So Chemical
The Miami Media and Film Market.
and Cinevision.
Yeah.
Okay.
We
will
got them all.
hear you and see you next time.
All right. Dali.
Boom.